Alright, today's lesson is lesson number 83. We're still talking about parabolas. Today we're going to talk about completing the square in order to write the equation in vertex form. So we did this with ellipses and hyperbolas and circles, and now we're going to do it with parabolas. Okay, so here are the steps. The first thing you want to do is identify the squared variable. Remember, for parabolas we either have something like y equals x squared, or x equals y squared with some other numbers, of course, in there. So you want to identify, okay, is this an x squared type or a y squared type? Okay, then you're going to move all the terms with that variable to the right. So if it's an x squared, make sure you move anything that has an x over to the right. And if it's a y squared, you move anything with a y to the right. Okay, then you'll complete the square for that variable. You're going to factor it to the perfect square binomial. Then simplify and you'll solve for the non-squared variable. Okay, so here's 1 and 2. First thing, for number 1, I see that x is my variable that's squared, so I'm going to move that over to the other side. That gives me 12y minus 120 equals x squared. Now I'm going to solve for y, and I'm jumping to this because I don't have anything else that has an x in it, so I don't really even need to complete the square for this problem. It's really just solving for y now. So I add 120, I have 12y equals x squared plus 120, and then I divide by 12, which gives me y equals 1/12 x squared plus 10. This is already in vertex form, but it may not look as familiar because we're used to having something in parentheses. This is really just like x minus 0 squared, okay? And then plus 10. Okay, the 10 I get from doing 120 over 12. And dividing that, and I get the 1/12 because it's x squared over 12. Okay, so either one of these would be acceptable on a test as your answer. Okay, this is a form that we like because we can see, okay, the vertex is 0, 10, A is 1/12, and we can graph and find the focus and directrix more easily. Okay, number 2, I would start by identifying that y is my squared variable. Okay, that means that I'm going to move everything with a y in it to the other side. Okay, so I'll do that by adding y squared and subtracting 4y from both sides. I'm left with x minus 8 on the left, and then y squared minus 4y on the right. Okay, now I know I'm going to be completing the square with this part on the right, so I'm going to leave space to add. I know that I'm going to be adding something, right, into the equation. I need to do it on both sides, so I'm going to leave space over here. Okay, that's going to equal y squared minus 4y. Now I'm going to complete the square, so I take half of 4, which is negative 2. Half of negative 4, I should say. Negative 2 squared is 4, so really I'm adding 4 to the right side. So I'll add 4 to the left to make it even. That gives me x minus 4 on the left equals y minus 2 squared on the right. And I solve for x by adding 4 to both sides. So x equals y minus 2 squared plus 4 is my final answer here. Okay. And moving on to 3 and 4. Number 3 is just like number 1. Okay, but it has, instead of x squared, it's y squared. So I'll start by moving that over to the other side. And now I have 3x minus 15 equals negative y squared. I know that I don't have to complete the square because it's just y squared by itself. There isn't anything else with a y in it. So I just go ahead and solve for x at this point. I start by adding 15 to the other side and then dividing by 3. So 3x equals negative y squared plus 15. I divide by 3 to get x by itself. That gives me negative 1/3 y squared plus 15 divided by 3 is 5. Okay. In number 4, I see that my variable that's squared is an x, so I'm going to move these two terms to the other side. I subtract x squared and add 2x. That leaves me with y plus 4 equals negative x squared plus 2x. Okay, so this is y plus 4. I'm going to leave some space to complete the square. And here I notice that I have a negative in front of my x squared, and if you remember back to when we were doing completing the square with those other conic sections, we can't have anything in front of the squared term. It has to just be a 1. So I need to factor out this negative. That gives me negative times x squared minus 2x. I take half of negative 2 squared and add it to both sides in order to complete the square. So this is just negative 1 squared. This term, negative 1 squared, is a positive 1, but it's in these parentheses that are being multiplied by a negative. Okay, so really I'm subtracting 1 from this side of the equation. So I need to subtract 1 from this side of the equation. Okay, so that's why we get a minus 1 here. And then I can factor and simplify. On the right, I just get y plus 3, and on the left, I get y plus 3. On the right, I get negative x minus 1 squared, and I can solve for y by subtracting 3. Okay, so I get x equals negative x minus 1 squared minus 3 as my final answer. Okay, number 5, my squared term is y. So I'm going to move everything with a y in it to the other side. I'm left with 4x plus 9 equals negative y squared minus 10y. I'm going to complete the square, so I'll leave space on this side. And I know I need to factor out the negative here in order to complete the square. So I have y squared plus 10y plus half of 10 is 5 squared. I'm adding 5 squared in the parentheses, so I'm adding 25. But it's being multiplied by a negative 1, so really I'm subtracting 25 from this side. That's why I subtract 25 from the other side as well. Okay, and simplifying, this is 4x minus 16 equals negative y plus 5 squared. Adding 16 to the other side so that I can solve for x. And then dividing everything by 4. I get x equals negative 1/4 times y plus 5 squared plus 4. Okay? And last one here, number 6. Same thing, y is what's squared, so I'm going to move those to the other side. I get x plus 67 equals negative y squared plus 16y when I move them over. Leaving space to complete the square and factoring out a negative, this is what I have. Half of 16 is negative 8. Since I'm adding 64, right, negative 8 squared is 64, so I'm adding 64 inside the parentheses, but then it's being multiplied by this negative 1, so I'm really subtracting 64, so I'll subtract 64 from this side as well. Okay, that gives me x plus 3 equals negative y minus 8 squared. And subtracting 3 from both sides, I get x equals negative y minus 8 squared minus 3. Okay, so after going over these problems, we talked about some closing questions. So what did we learn? Today we learned how to complete the square with the equation of a parabola so that we can convert it into vertex form. How do we do that? Well, we use our steps. So we need to identify the squared variable in the equation, and then we move all the terms with that variable to the right side. We complete the square for that variable, we factor and simplify, and then solve for the non-squared variable. And how does this relate to other topics we've covered? Well, we did a very similar process for hyperbolas, ellipses, and circles when we were completing the square. We also have used completing the square to solve quadratic equations in previous classes, and we have been talking about parabolas all week, so it fits in that way. Okay, if you're at home and you'd like some practice, here's some extra practice problems. Go ahead, pause here, write these down, work them out, and I'll flip to the next slide with the answers. Okay, so if you work these out, you should get these as the answers. Okay, when you have a number in front and you move it over, make sure that you're factoring that out. Okay, that's how you end up with this 8 factored out here. Alright, and that is it for today's lesson. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks.